The aroma of spices filled my grandmother's kitchen as she stirred the creamy sauce on the old stove. I, at 20 years old, watched every move of her wrinkled hands. Michael, food isn't just sustenance. It's memory. It's love turned into flavor, Grandma Eleanor would say, as she taught me the secrets of her gumbo. Upstairs, my sister Emily was recording yet another video for her thousands of followers. Our house in New Orleans' Garden District was a constant silent battleground. I slept in the guest room, which had been converted into my makeshift space, while Emily had her own studio to produce content. My father, William, an executive at an oil company, never hid his disappointment with my culinary aspirations. "Chefs don't build fortunes, Michael," he would repeat during dinners while praising Emily for her latest social media sponsorship. My mother, Catherine, tried to ease the tension with nervous smiles, but her preference was clear when she agreed, saying, "Emily has a vision for the future." On those afternoons with Grandma Eleanor, I found peace. With her heavy accent, she would tell stories of great-grandfather Gregory, who had fled Hungary and become a chef in New Orleans, blending Eastern European techniques with rich Creole cuisine. Subscribe to the channel and hit like to get access to more stories like this. The phone call came on a rainy Tuesday. Grandma Eleanor had passed away in her sleep. Her heart, which had shared so much love through her recipes, simply stopped. The funeral was short, just as she always wanted. The lawyer's office, however, felt like it lasted for hours. Mr. Donovan, with his glasses perched on the tip of his nose, read the will in a monotone voice. The tension grew with each paragraph. "To my granddaughter Emily, I leave my house in the Garden District and my investments, totaling approximately $780,000, to help fund your studies at Columbia University." Emily let out a contained squeal while my father smiled proudly. My mother squeezed my hand, perhaps sensing what was coming. "To my grandson Michael, I leave my family recipe book and the carved wooden box where I kept it." The silence was awkward. My father coughed, impatient. Emily avoided my gaze. Only Mr. Donovan seemed oblivious to the imbalance, continuing to read the smaller items. On the way home, comforting words sounded empty. "She knew you don't need money to be happy, Michael," my mother said. "Maybe you could sell some recipes to cooking magazines," Emily added, trying to sound generous. The recipe book felt like it weighed a ton in my hands. Bound in worn leather with yellowed pages stained by various ingredients, Grandma's handwriting mixed with that of great-grandfather Gregory, creating a culinary timeline for our family. 3 weeks after the funeral, I found my parents in the garage admiring Emily's new white Tesla, a motivational gift for her move to New York. That very night during dinner, I summoned the courage to mention the cooking show in Paris I had always dreamed of. "We need to be practical, Michael. We're already financing an apartment in Manhattan for your sister, not to mention her tuition," my father declared, cutting his meat without looking up. "Maybe it's time you looked for a real job." Emily tried to soften the blow. "You could take some online courses, Mike. They're a lot cheaper." Something inside me broke. It wasn't just about the money, but about value, about how my dreams were always seen as less important. I went up to my room and started packing my things. Besides clothes and a few personal belongings, I carefully placed Grandma's recipe book and a small set of kitchen knives I had been collecting into my backpack. I also added an old picture frame and a few family items that nobody had ever wanted. I left a simple note on the fridge, following my own path. "Don't worry, Michael." The apartment I managed to rent in the French Quarter was smaller than my old closet. From the window, I saw nothing but a brick wall and heard the constant noise from nearby bars. My bed was just a mattress on the floor, and the kitchen was nothing more than a 2-burner stove and a mini-fridge. I got a job washing dishes at the Bourbon Street Bistro. My hands, which had dreamed of creating refined dishes, were immersed in soapy water for hours. On weekends, I made food deliveries by bike to make ends meet. It was on one of those deliveries that I met Jessica, the sous chef at an up-and-coming restaurant. She had just finished work when she saw me pedaling in the rain with the takeout containers balanced on my bike. "You look determined," she commented, sharing her umbrella with me while I locked up my bike. During our conversations over cheap coffee, I shared my passion for cooking and the family recipes. She encouraged me to study Grandma's book on my days off. "These recipes are unique, Michael. The fusion of Eastern European with Creole cuisine is something you don't see around here." At night, worn out, I'd flip through the stained pages of the book, trying to decipher great-grandfather Gregory's Hungarian notes and Grandma's translations. Without proper equipment, I adapted the recipes for my simple stove, using cheap pans bought at thrift stores. After 3 months of living on the edge, I encountered something strange while testing a Hungarian strudel recipe. Between two stuck pages of the recipe book, I noticed a small irregularity. Carefully, I separated them using a butter knife. There, hidden for decades, was a small square of colored paper. It looked like an old postage stamp, with a crest image and the value 3 skilling printed in vibrant yellow. On the back, an elegant handwritten note read, "For emergencies. Gregory, 1926. Intrigued, I took a photo of the stamp and sent it to Jessica, who had a friend that collected them. Her response came within minutes. "Don't touch anything. I'm on my way now." 2 hours later, Jessica, her friend Marcus, and I were staring at the small scrap of paper on my makeshift table. "If it's authentic, and I believe it is, we're looking at a Treskilling Yellow, one of the rarest stamps in the world," Marcus explained, adjusting his glasses. This Swedish stamp from 1855 was printed in yellow by mistake when it should have been green. There are very few known examples. "How much is it worth?" I asked, feeling my heart race. Marcus took a deep breath. "The last one sold at auction for about $2.3 million. But that was years ago. The current value could be much higher." My legs wavered. I sat in the only chair in the apartment, staring at that tiny piece of paper that my great-grandfather had kept for emergencies. "We need to have it officially authenticated," Jessica said, holding my hand. "And I know just the right people for that." That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought about Grandma Eleanor and her apparent imbalance in the inheritance. Could she have known? After all, the recipe book wasn't just a set of cooking instructions. It was a treasure in disguise, waiting to be discovered by someone who truly valued its history. The authentication of the stamp was a meticulous process. 3 independent experts confirmed I held an authentic Treskilling Yellow from 1855. The Sotheby's auction house agreed to include it in their next rare collectibles event. For 6 weeks, I lived between anxiety and hope. I continued working at the Bourbon Street Bistro, hiding the possibility of a big change from my coworkers. Only Jessica knew, and we spent countless nights planning what we would do if the stamp reached the expected value. "Think big, Michael. This is the kind of opportunity that only comes once in a lifetime," she said as we sketched out kitchen layouts on cheap napkins. Auction day arrived. Sitting in the back row of the hall, wearing my only ironed dress shirt, I watched as high society types competed for rare objects. When my stamp appeared on the screen, the auctioneer started with a starting price that would change my life. "We're starting at $1,200,000 for this exceptional example of the Treskilling Yellow." The bids kept climbing, and my heart raced with every new offer. When the gavel fell, the final bid took my breath away. $3,200,000. Later in an office after the auction, a lawyer explained taxes and investments while I signed documents with trembling hands. I left with a check that represented more money than I had ever imagined owning. That night, Jessica and I celebrated with cheap champagne in my tiny apartment. "It's time to honor your grandmother and your great-grandfather," she said, raising a plastic cup. "Let's create something that would have made them both proud." The next morning, we started looking for commercial properties. After visiting dozens of spaces, we found an old warehouse in the Marigny neighborhood, just a few blocks from the French Quarter. The space needed a complete overhaul, but it had character. Exposed bricks, tall windows, and a small inner courtyard. Thompson's Legacy, that would be the name of the restaurant, honoring my grandmother's maiden name and the culinary heritage she passed on to me. I hired an architect to transform the warehouse, preserving its original structure while creating an environment that blended the rustic charm of New Orleans with elements of Eastern Europe. The process was intense. While overseeing the renovation, I spent months refining the recipes from Grandma's book, adapting them to a contemporary palate without losing their essence. Jessica, who quit her previous job, became my partner in the business, bringing her kitchen management expertise. At the same time, I invested part of the money in a safety fund and bought a modest, yet comfortable apartment. With advice from a financial planner, I made sure I would never have to live in poor conditions again. The grand opening of Thompson's Legacy took place on a rainy night in March. Despite the weather, a line formed out on the sidewalk, a result of the discreet yet effective marketing campaign we had planned, focusing on the restaurant's history and its century-old recipes. The kitchen, equipped with the most modern gear, was my sacred domain. There, great-grandfather Gregory's handwritten recipes came to life in contemporary interpretations. The tasting menu told a story through each dish. It started with a reimagined gulya soup, followed by a Hungarian-style escargot appetizer, moving on to a gumbo with Eastern European influences, and finishing with dessert, a peach strudel with bourbon cream, a recipe Grandma Eleanor only made on special occasions. The first few weeks were a whirlwind. We worked 18 hours a day, fine-tuning processes, training the team, and meeting the rising demand. Jessica ran the dining room with precision as I commanded the kitchen. A month after opening, an influential food critic visited anonymously. His review, published in the Sunday Times-Picayune, was exactly the boost we needed. Thompson's legacy isn't just a restaurant, it's a time machine of gastronomy. The fusion of robust Hungarian cuisine with the deep flavors of Creole cooking creates an unparalleled dining experience in New Orleans. The dishes tell stories of immigrants, families, and traditions interwoven in the cultural melting pot that is this city. Reservations started being booked months in advance. We expanded the staff, but I maintained strict control over quality. Every dish that left the kitchen had to meet the high standard that honored the culinary memories preserved in Grandma's book. As success grew, so did the challenges. Suppliers couldn't always meet our quality standards, employees struggled to adapt to our philosophy, and there were structural issues with the old warehouse. On one particularly tough night, the exhaust system completely failed during a packed service. "We're going to have to close for tonight," Jessica said, worried about the smoke beginning to fill the dining room. "No," I replied firmly. "We'll serve in the courtyard. Reorganize the tables outside, explain the situation to the guests, and offer each table a complimentary bottle of wine." What could have been a disaster turned into a memorable night. Under the stars and string lights we hurriedly put up, the guests enjoyed a unique experience. The next day, our social media page was flooded with photos of that improvised night and enthusiastic comments about the restaurant's resilience and creativity. Financial success came quickly. In 6 months, we recouped our initial investment. Within a year, we began planning a controlled expansion, not to grow indiscriminately, but to accommodate a larger production kitchen where we could experiment with new recipes and preserve old techniques. Amid the professional successes, my relationship with Jessica evolved. Our bond, forged in moments of difficulty and celebration, deepened into something more. On a quiet night after service, sitting in the empty courtyard with only candlelight and the distant sound of jazz from Frenchman Street, I asked her to marry me. "We have an amazing partnership in business," I said nervously. "I want that same partnership in every aspect of life." She said yes, and we celebrated with a special bottle of Tokaji, the Hungarian wine that my great-grandfather mentioned in his notes as the nectar that heals all wounds. Almost 2 years had passed since I left my parents' house. I hadn't completely cut off contact. Short calls on holidays, occasional messages. They knew I had opened a restaurant, but the details about the rare stamp and the success of the venture remained unknown. Emily, after graduating, landed a job at a digital marketing agency, continuing her career as an influencer on the side. On a particularly busy Friday night, Jessica touched my shoulder in the kitchen. "Michael, you need to come to the dining room," she whispered, her expression mixing worry and curiosity. Wiping my hands on my apron, I followed her to the crowded restaurant. That's when I saw them, my parents and Emily, seated at a table in the middle of the dining room, looking over the menu with surprised expressions. They didn't notice me right away, absorbed as they were in the elaborate descriptions of the dishes. "How did they get here?" I asked, feeling my heart thump. "Reservation made 3 weeks ago. The Anderson family name. I only connected the dots when I saw them arriving," Jessica explained, squeezing my hand in silent solidarity. I took a deep breath and walked over to the table. The gradual look of recognition on their faces is something I'll never forget. Surprise, confusion, and finally, a stunned understanding. "Michael, this place is yours?" my mother asked as she got up to hug me hesitantly. My father remained seated, surveying the room with critical eyes. Emily alternated between looking at me and observing the elegant, crowded restaurant around us. "Yes, for almost 2 years," I replied calmly. "What did you think of the starter?" "It's the original recipe from great-grandfather Gregory." My mother covered her mouth. I recognized the flavor but couldn't place where it came from. "It's identical to what Grandma used to make at Christmas." The initial tension slowly dissolved as the dishes arrived. With every bite, family memories were unearthed. My father, usually so reserved, closed his eyes as he tasted the reimagined goulash. "It reminds me of that dinner your grandmother made for my partners," he admitted. "I've never seen businessmen so impressed with home-cooked food." Emily, typical of her generation, snapped a photo of each dish before tasting. "Mike, this is amazing. Is the restaurant always this packed? Do you have a waiting list?" I briefly explained our journey without mentioning the rare stamp. They stayed for dessert and met Jessica, who charmed my parents with her intelligence and business insight. When the meal ended, my father asked to see the kitchen. During the tour, I noticed his eyes appraising the equipment, calculating the necessary investment. "This must have cost a fortune," he commented, stopping in front of the imported oven from Italy. "It was a necessary investment," I replied vaguely. Back at the table, as he signed the check, I insisted on charging the usual amount. My father finally asked the inevitable question. "How did you finance all of this, Michael? This place is worth millions." The restaurant was nearly empty. It was time for the truth. "Remember Grandma's recipe book? The only item she left for me?" I paused, watching their expressions. Inside it, I found a rare postage stamp that belonged to great-grandfather Gregory, a genuine Treskilling yellow from 1855. Emily furrowed her brow, confused. My mother waited patiently for the conclusion. My father, however, visibly paled. "An authentic Treskilling yellow? Do you know how much that's worth?" he asked in a strangled voice. "I do. I auctioned it for $2 million at Sotheby's." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily dropped her fork. My mother covered her face with her hands. My father, always controlled, struggled to process the information. "The stamp was part of the family inheritance," he finally said in a tense voice. "It belonged to all of us." "No, Dad. It was in the recipe book that Grandma left specifically for me," I replied firmly. She knew exactly what she was doing. The discussion that followed was intense, yet controlled. We were, after all, in a public place. My father argued that the stamp's value should have been divided equally. Emily wavered between supporting him and recognizing my right to the discovery. My mother, surprisingly, remained in reflective silence. "You still don't understand," she finally said when the discussion began to repeat the same arguments. "It's not just about money. It's about legacy, about cherishing what really mattered to Grandma and great-grandfather Gregory." I pointed to the restaurant around us, to the satisfied customers, to the flavors that had transcended generations. This is the true treasure they wanted to pass on. Not money, but our family's story told through food. The confrontation at the restaurant temporarily widened the distance between us. For weeks, there was no contact except a brief message from my mother asking if I was all right. I threw myself into work, expanding the seasonal menu and experimenting with new techniques inspired by great-grandfather's notes. Jessica noticed my restlessness. "You built something incredible here, Michael. But family is complicated. Maybe it's time to try having a calmer conversation." Stubbornly, I stayed focused on the restaurant. However, her words stuck with me, especially when we found out we were expecting our first child. The news of the pregnancy changed my perspective on family bonds and legacies. On a Sunday morning, when the restaurant was closed, I got an unexpected phone call. "Michael?" My mother's hesitant voice sounded on the other end. "Emily is graduating next week. She really wants you to be there." A long pause. "We would all like that." The graduation ceremony at Columbia University was elegant and formal. I sat next to my parents, one row behind where the graduates' family members sat. The atmosphere was cordial but tense. During the reception after the ceremony, Emily approached me, still dressed in her cap and gown. "Thanks for coming," she said, genuinely happy to see me. "It means a lot to me." I handed her a small package wrapped in handmade paper. "What is it?" she asked, curious. "Open it when you're alone." Later that night, at a celebratory dinner in an elegant Manhattan restaurant, Emily sat next to me. "Michael, the gift, are those pages from Grandma's recipe book? They're copies of my favorite recipes, with my own personal notes," I explained. "I thought you might want a piece of that legacy too." Her eyes filled with tears. "Grandma always said you inherited great-grandfather's talent," she admitted. "You know, when I tasted that strudel at your restaurant, it reminded me of her saying that." Across the table, my father observed our interaction. After dessert, he asked to speak with me privately. We walked to the small garden outside the restaurant. "I was unfair to you, Michael," he began, his words seeming hard to get out. "For years, I tried to shape your life according to my expectations, without respecting your choices." I stayed silent, giving him room to continue. "When I saw your restaurant, the success you built, I realized I was wrong." He paused. "Your grandmother always saw something in you I could never see." "What exactly?" "Passion, determination, the same spark in her eyes when she talked about food." He smiled faintly. "She once told me that you were the only one who truly understood the value of our family recipes." It was the first time my father openly acknowledged the value of my path. Something inside me began to relax. "As for the stamp," he continued, That's all in the past, Dad, I interrupted. The money was invested in the restaurant and in a financial safety net for our family. Mine, Jessica's, and the baby on the way. News of the baby broke the final barrier. My father hugged me tightly, something he hadn't done since I was a child. In the following months, our family relationships gradually evolved. My parents visited New Orleans to get to know the restaurant better and to follow Jessica's pregnancy. Emily, after working a few months at a New York agency, surprised everyone by expressing interest in learning more about the food business. I'm thinking about shifting my career toward food marketing, she explained during one of her weekends in New Orleans. What do you think about me interning at Thompson's Legacy for a few months? The idea initially made me apprehensive, but Jessica saw potential. Your sister has a talent for communication and understands the digital audience. We could expand our online presence and reach a younger clientele. Emily spent the summer working with us, developing a social media strategy that highlighted not only the dishes, but also the stories behind them. Her series, Recipes with History, became a viral hit, with short videos where I explained each dish's origins while preparing simplified versions for the audience to try at home. My father, impressed with the ongoing success of the business, offered to invest in opening a second restaurant. I don't want to interfere with your vision, he explained when I politely declined. But I'm proud of what you've built and would love to be a part of it, if you'd let me. Instead of a second restaurant, I accepted his help to expand Thompson's Legacy by acquiring the adjacent property. The new space would house a culinary school specializing in fusion techniques and preserving traditional recipes, the Thompson Culinary Academy. My mother, revealing a knack for decor that she never had the chance to explore professionally, helped design the spaces, creating environments that honored both our Hungarian heritage and Creole tradition. The academy became a place where we shared not only cooking techniques, but values about food, family, and tradition. At one of the inaugural classes, I invited my father to speak about the importance of preserving family stories. For years, I thought success was only about financial prosperity, he confessed to the students. My son showed me that true success lies in honoring who we are and where we came from, transforming that into something that can nourish future generations, both literally and figuratively. Emily eventually returned to New York, but she stayed involved with the business remotely. She developed a line of artisanal products based on our family recipes, spices, preserves, bread mixes, that began selling online and in the boutique attached to the restaurant. When Jessica went into labor, the whole family gathered in New Orleans. Gregory William Anderson was born on a sunny spring afternoon, named in honor of my great-grandfather and my father. Watching my son in my mother's arms, with my father and Emily by my side, I understood that Grandma Eleanor's true legacy wasn't the rare stamp or even the recipes, but the way she managed to bring our family together around shared values even after she was gone. On the third anniversary of Thompson's Legacy, we organized a special celebratory dinner. The restaurant was closed exclusively for family and close friends. Jessica and I prepared a tasting menu that narrated our journey, from the simple dishes I made in my tiny first apartment to the sophisticated creations that earned us a Michelin star the previous year. Our son Gregory, now almost 2 years old, ran between tables under the watchful eyes of his grandparents. Emily had brought her fiancé, a French pastry chef she'd met during a confectionery course in Paris. After dinner, when everyone was satisfied and the mood was one of quiet celebration, I decided to share something I had kept for a long time. Before we serve dessert, I'd like to show you something special, I announced, bringing out the old wooden box where the recipe book was kept. I placed it on the central table. The hand-carved box had belonged to great-grandfather Gregory, and later to Grandma Eleanor. Its worn edges and wood darkened by time told tales of travels, kitchens, and hands that prepared food with love. This box has been with our family for over a century, I explained. When I received it, I thought I knew all its secrets. Carefully, I turned the box over and pressed a nearly unnoticeable mechanism at the base. A secret compartment opened, revealing a hidden space that I had discovered only a few weeks earlier while restoring the box for preservation. From there, I took out a yellowed envelope and a small gold coin. I found this hidden inside the base of the box, I said, showing the coin to everyone gathered. It's a Hungarian Corona gold coin from 1908. Apparently, great-grandfather Gregory took it with him when he fled to America. My father examined the coin with curiosity. It must be worth something, even if certainly not as much as the stamp, he commented, now able to talk about it without bitterness. Its value isn't just monetary, I replied. Along with the coin, I found this letter. I carefully unfolded the paper, revealing Grandma's elegant handwriting. I began to read, "Dear Michael, if you are reading this letter, it means you have discovered the last secret compartment in the recipe box. I'm not surprised. You have always had the curiosity and perseverance of your father. The coin you found is the last material keepsake your grandfather brought from Hungary. He kept it hidden during tough times, refusing to sell it even when money was scarce. To him, it wasn't just gold, but a symbol of his roots and the journey that brought him here. Just like the stamp that you probably already found between the pages of the recipe book, this coin represents something more valuable than its weight in gold. It represents our history. Michael, I always knew you would be the one to truly understand the value of these heirlooms. Not for the figures they could fetch, but for the stories they carry. You have the gift of turning stories into flavors, memories into nourishment. Always remember, our family survived wars, revolutions, migrations, and hardships because we kept the flame of our tradition alive. Food was our language of love, our bond with the past, and our hope for the future. Keep the story going. Add your own chapters. And when the time comes, pass on not just the material possessions, but the understanding of their true value. With all my love, Grandma Eleanor." When I finished reading, the silence in the room was palpable. My mother discreetly wiped away tears. Emily held her fiancé's hand tightly. My father stared off into the distance, as if he could see beyond the restaurant walls. Jessica came over with our son in her arms, placing her free hand on my shoulder in silent support. "She knew," my father finally said, his voice thick. "Eleanor knew exactly what she was doing when she divided the inheritance that way. She saw in you what took me years to see," he continued, "the true guardian of our family legacy." Emily took the recipe book and flipped through it reverently. "It's incredible to think of all the generations that contributed to this. Great-grandfather Gregory, Grandma Eleanor, you, and now we continue. That's why I decided to do something special," I announced. "With Jessica's help, we compiled a book that documents not only the original recipes, but also our modern adaptations, the stories behind each dish, and photographs of our family through the generations." I showed them the prototype of the book, Thompson's Legacy, A Family History and Recipes, which was set to be published next month. Each of you will receive a special copy, of course. But more importantly, we're creating a foundation that will offer scholarships to young chefs interested in preserving and reinventing traditional family recipes. The Eleanor Thompson Foundation, added Jessica, will fund culinary studies, research on immigrant gastronomy, and projects to document traditional recipes at risk of disappearing. I raised my cup for a final toast. To Grandma Eleanor and great-grandfather Gregory, whose true treasures were not rare stamps or gold coins, but the knowledge they preserved and the love they infused into every recipe. And to all of us, for finally understanding the real value of this legacy. Looking around at my gathered family, at Jessica and our son, at the team that had become part of our story, I fully understood my grandmother's message. The greatest treasure wasn't hidden in secret compartments or yellowed pages. It was right here, alive in the connections we built, in the traditions we honored, and in the new memories we created with every meal shared. The recipe book, which at first seemed like a minor inheritance compared to the fortune left for my sister, turned out to be the most valuable gift, not because of the $1,000,000 stamp it once contained, but because of the purpose and meaning it brought to my life. Subscribe to the channel and hit like to get access to more stories like this. And so, the cycle continued. Soon, it would be my turn to pass on this knowledge to my son Gregory, teaching him that the greatest treasures are rarely the ones that shine the brightest at first glance, but those that reveal their true worth only to those wise enough to appreciate them.